Guten Tag, Push. We have a new video today. It's our last one. It's the bee's knees, though, by the big cheese himself, Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we jaw over Unit 8, Day 7. We'll talk about World Power America, 1945 to present. But first, let's do our daily punishment. Last one of the year. Oh, no. Let me tell you about my grandfather. He was a good man, a brave man. He had the heart of a lion and a lifetime ban from the zoo. It's dark. All right, we're going to first get started talking about the presidency of Harry Truman and Mr. Dwight D. Eisenhower first. So Harry Truman is going to be president at the end of World War II. After World War II, they will try some of the Nazi trials. They will try some of the Nazi war criminals in the Nuremberg trials. It's one of the first international courts. They'll also try some of the Japanese war criminals in the Tokyo trials. America will rescue some war criminals in Operation Paperclip. In return, they have to work for the U.S. government. Like, so example, we do that with like Nazi scientists who helped form NASA. In the election of 1948, it looked like Truman would lose the election because the Democratic Party split three ways, but he wins in the surprise of the century. For the Cold War was really caused between ideological disagreements between America and Russia. America was upset that Truman was upset that Russia was not following Yalta and they were not given free elections in Eastern Europe. We thought Stalin was going to become a new Hitler. Russia was upset that we never really it took us a long time to actually fight in World War II. They also distrusted the West. After the war, Congress will pass the GI Bill, which will give low interest housing and like free college for service soldiers. Truman's domestic policy will be called the Fair Deal, which is going to expand on parts of the New Deal. He does want the Point Four program, which was like the early version of the Peace Corps, but that won't happen until Kennedy. Congress will pass the Taft-Hartley Act, which kind of limited the Wagner Act. Truman will try to veto it, but Congress will override his veto. Truman's big things will be in his foreign policy. He will come up with the idea of containment from George F. Kennan, where he wants to stop the spread of communism. He's going to do the Truman Doctrine, where we offer military and economic aid to any country resisting communism. This happens because of Greece and Turkey. He also does the Marshall Plan, which helped rebuild economically Western Europe. During this time, in the 1940s and 1950s, we have the Second Red Scare in America. A lot of it's led by Joseph McCarthy. You also have Congress doing HUAC, and where they're trying some people like Alger Hiss, the Hollywood 10. Germany was divided between West and East during this time. Stalin wanted all of Berlin to himself because Berlin was also divided. This is where he does the Berlin blockade. And America will send airplanes to provide food for the Berliners. This is the Berlin Airlift. Stalin will back down from this. Under Truman, he'll pass the National Security Act, which will create National Security Agency. The McCarran Act will be passed. Same thing with the Loyalty Review Board. The Rosenbergs will be tried for giving secret information to the Russians. They actually did do that. Alger Hiss will be convicted for perjury. He actually was a communist spy. The Smith Act will be passed, which is another anti-communist law. America will go to war with North Korea. During this time, after World War II, Korea was divided between North and South. Northern Korea, the communist side, will invade Southern Korea. The United Nations will send an army in to push them back. Douglas MacArthur wanted to nuke North Korea and nuke China, and Truman will fire him. In 1952, Eisenhower will become president, and he'll be president from 1952 to 1960. During the presidency of Eisenhower, you're going to see a surge of homeownership, suburbia, white flight. You have Walt Disney. You have a lot of commercialism, McDonald's, Disneyland, dinner cards. You have like the TV is born. You have the computer industry with IBM. You have women during this time period. Women are kind of retreating to the cult of domesticity. However, so women like kind of retreat back to the household after World War II, no longer Rosie the Riveteer. However, there were some women that were upset about this. So this is going to really lead to the second wave of feminism. You have the feminine mystique created by Betty Friedman. They complain about the pink-collar ghetto, how women are working, but they're still supposed to take home. They're still supposed to monitor and do everything at home as well. We still have the Red Scare going on during Eisenhower's presidency with Joseph McCarthy, the Hiss case, the Rosenberg case, the Hollywood 10. Civil rights becomes a much bigger deal during this time period. In 1954, you have Brown v. Board of Education, which gets rid of segregation, although it doesn't give a proper timetable for it. The Southerners, a lot of Southern Congress people signed the Southern Manifesto, where they refused to follow Brown v. Board of Education. You have the Little Rock Nine in Central High School, which Eisenhower had to send the soldiers in to help desegregate 9 African Americans to go to Central High School in Arkansas. And Rosa Parks is going to refuse to get off the bus. This is going to lead to the Montgomery Bus Crisis. The leader of this whole movement for the Montgomery bus will be Martin Luther King Jr. Him and the SCLC are going to do a nonviolent civil disobedience, and it will be successful. Congress will pass the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which will not have enforcement powers. And you will start to see sit-in movements in 1960 in places like North Carolina. For Eisenhower's domestic policy for economics, he's going to do dynamic conservatism. He does the Interstate Highway Act. He was moderate. He even expands Social Security. His foreign policy is actually not that much different than Truman's. He claimed that he was going to do brinkmanship, but he never nuked Russia or anything. A lot of it was just rhetoric. During this time, the world would be divided into 2 alliances, the Warsaw Pact, the Communist Alliance, and the NATO alliance. Eisenhower will have a couple of meetings with the Russians to try to improve relations, like Geneva Summit, which does not really go anywhere. We create an anti-communist alliance, SEATO. Under Khrushchev, they're going to invade Hungary, and America will not really do anything. His foreign policy was sometimes called New Look foreign policy also. Eisenhower is going to expand the Truman Doctrine to the Middle East. Although when Britain and France and Israel invade Egypt, we actually support the Russians and oppose what they're doing. One of the things that scares the Americans during this time is the Russians' launching of Sputnik. This is going to lead to the National Defensive Education Act, which increases funds for math and science. We did have a summit with the Russians to try to improve relationships, but this is when our U-2 ship is shot down and Eisenhower has to apologize. During this time, Fidel Castro will become communist dictator of Cuba, and Eisenhower will start sending soldiers into Vietnam. Vietnam used to be a French colony. France pulls out of Vietnam in the 1950s, and Vietnam became 2 countries, and we wanted Southern Vietnam to remain non-communist. And under Eisenhower, he will do CIA coups in places like Iran and Guatemala. In 1960, John F. Kennedy will win the presidency over Richard Nixon, mostly because of television. His domestic policy was called the New Frontier. One of his biggest accomplishments was the Peace Corps. He will do a policy called flexible response, which allows for a lot of options, not very rigid foreign policy. With interballistic continental missiles, massive retaliation no longer works. Some of the bad things he did was he had the Bay of Pigs, where he armed and supported Cuban exiles trying to invade Cuba, which was a disaster. He was president during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which it looked like we would go to war with Russia because they were arming the Cubans with nuclear bombs. At the last second, there was a compromise that was created. He's going to increase advisors and soldiers into Vietnam. He's going to give the okay for the assassination of the Vietnamese leader because he didn't think he was effective, Ngo Diem. Berlin is going to get a wall to separate their country during this time. He will sign the nuclear test ban treaty with the Russians to try to improve relationships with the Russians. For Kennedy, he will be ambivalent towards civil rights. He didn't want to lose the election. He didn't want to lose the South. But like Edgar Mevers will be assassinated. MLK is going to push him with his Birmingham movement, and where he's arrested in the letters from a Birmingham jail. You have the Birmingham bombing. King's going to do a march on Washington, D.C., and Kennedy will propose civil rights legislation, but he really doesn't do anything for civil rights. And he'll be assassinated in 1963 in Dallas. In 1964, my boy, LBJ, will become president. He's going to do the Great Society, his war on poverty. He'll do the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He gets rid of poll tax. He is going to create the first African-American member of department, HUD. He's going to dominate the election of 1964. He does the war on poverty. He creates the National Endowment of the Arts. He's going to do federal aid to education, Medicare, Medicaid. He'll do immigration reform. In the 1920s, they had the whole quota system. He's going to try to get rid of the quotas. You will see a split in the African-American civil rights movement in the 1960s between the Black Power movement and the movement of MLK. The Black Power movement was led by people like Malcolm X and the Black Panthers. There will be some African-American race riots because of the horrible condition and police brutality during this time. What's going on is the thing that really kills Johnson's presidency is Vietnam. In 1964, Johnson claimed that one of our ships was sunk. Congress gives him a blank check to do what he needs to do in Vietnam. After the election of 64, he's going to do Operation Warring Thunder, where he does a bombing campaign in Vietnam. He's going to put more and more soldiers in Vietnam. He keeps saying we're winning the war, but we never were. In 1968, the North Vietnamese do a massive campaign against American soldiers, the Tet Offensive. Even though we pushed them back, it really shows that we were not winning this war. In 1968, some of the Democrats will challenge Johnson for president. Eugene McCarthy will, and then Robert Kennedy will. Robert Kennedy and then Martin Luther King Jr. will both be assassinated in 1968. Richard Nixon will win the election of 1968. Some of the cultural stuff going on in the 1960s is we have the free speech movement, hippies, we have the Summer of Love, we have the American Indian movement, the gay rights movement, and the Chicano movement, the Raza. Let's talk about the 1970s and 1980s. One of the big issues that Richard Nixon will deal with is Vietnam and stagflation. Stagflation is increased inflation and unemployment. Nixon's Vietnam policy will be called Vietnamization, where he trains the Vietnamese soldiers, the Southern Vietnamese soldiers, to be able to defend their own country, and he starts to pull out American soldiers. There will be more anti-war protests during this time. This is when the My Lai massacre happens, where some U.S. soldiers massacred a whole Vietnamese village. We have the Kent State and Jackson State massacre, which were anti-war protests, where the National Guards fired on them. Congress is going to repeal the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Nixon wants to improve relations with Russia and China. During the Cold War, he wants to warm relations. This is called détente. He does the SALT I treaty with Russia, the grain deal. He's the first U.S. president to go to China, the Shanghai Communique. The Pentagon Papers will be released under Nixon's presidency, which kind of shows how America was lying during the Vietnam War. The Supreme Court, this was the Warren Court and the Berger Court. There's going to be a lot of very liberal things. We have Griswold v. Connecticut, which was right to privacy. We have Gideon v. Wainwright, which is right to a lawyer. Miranda v. U.S., right to have your rights read to you. New York Times, which said you can't limit freedom of the press. Roe v. Wade, which was the right to abortion, which was just recently overturned. Nixon will be a pretty progressive presidency. For the time period, Nixon will be a pretty progressive domestic president. He'll do the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act. He does affirmative action for governmental hires, the Philadelphia Plan. This is when the environmental movement becomes a big deal with Rachel Carson and Silent Springs. He's going to win a landslide in 1972. He will bomb Cambodia, which is going to outrage a lot of people. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution will be repealed. Congress will pass the War Powers Act, which was supposed to limit the president's power for war. The draft will end. America will pull out the soldiers in Vietnam, and then within 2 years, all of Vietnam will become communist. In the 1971, Israel will go to war with Egypt in the Yom Kippur War. We will give weapons to the Israelites. This will lead to the oil embargo and like gas lines and oil prices, and it's going to make stagflation even worse. Nixon's going to have to resign after Watergate when it found out that he had okayed and supported breaking into the Democratic Convention building, their hotel. And he's going to resign after the U.S. v. Nixon, which says that he does not have executive privilege to keep his tapes. Gerald Ford will pardon Nixon. He will do the Helsinki Accords to try to improve relationships with Russia. This is when we are defeated officially in Vietnam and all Vietnam becomes communist. There will be some feminist victories in the 1970s. We have Title IX, Roe v. Wade. The Equal Rights Amendment, however, was never passed. In 1976, we have a new president. It's not Ford. It's Jimmy Carter. Sorry, so this should say Jimmy Carter. He's going to create the Department of Energy. He does the Camp David Accords to get Egypt and Israel to sign a peace treaty. He gives up the Panama Canal. This was during the Iranian Revolution. During this time when they were holding our people hostage, so he looks really weak. He does the SALT II treaty with Russia, but that never Congress never ratifies it because Russia is going to invade Afghanistan. So Carter had all these problems. There was the whole stagflation. The economy was doing horrible, like 10% unemployment. The Iranian Revolution was happening. He couldn't get our people back. Russia invaded Afghanistan. He's going to go to the election against Reagan in 1980, and he's going to get his butt kicked. Ronald Reagan will be a Republican president. He's going to be the first modern-day conservative. He's going to want deregulation. He wants to go back to how it was before the New Deal. He wants to get rid of the environmental reforms. He wants to get rid of busing. He actually was against reauthorizing the Civil Rights Act. He wants to overturn family leave, get rid of abortion. He's going to be more aggressive foreign policy-wise. He's going to really push for an aggressive policy. He does the Star Wars program. He will have a good relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev and will do personal diplomacy with him. Under him, Reagan will do the Reagan Doctrine, which was one of his foreign policy things. He will have the CIA get involved in Afghanistan to help the people that are trying to overthrow the Russians. He will invade Grenada. His big scandal was the Iran-Contra scandal, where his people in his administration were secretly funneling money to the anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua, which went against congressional law. It was super illegal. But he actually gets out of that scandal okay. Reagan was known as a Teflon man. Nothing stuck to him. In 1988, we'll have a new president. We'll have George H. Walker Bush, Bush Sr. He's going to pass the American with Disabilities Act. He will raise taxes by breaking one of his campaign promises. He'll go to war with Iraq after they invade Kuwait. He will lose the election in 1992 to William Clinton. Clinton ran as a moderate. He's going to lose Congress in 1994 after he raises taxes. The Republicans are going to get Congress back by promising the contract with America, which we talked about before. Clinton will do the Welfare Reform Act. He is going to do make welfare harder to get. You have to have a job. And he has his big scandal with Monica Lewinsky for lying under oath about having sex with her. And he's impeached but not convicted. After Clinton, George W. Bush will be president from 2000 to 2008. He's president during 9/11. He's going to deal with 9/11 with the Patriot Act. He'll go to war with Iraq and Afghanistan. Congress will pass No Child Left Behind under him. He'll do a tax cut. And at the end of Bush's presidency, he'll have the Great Recession, which is going to very much hurt the U.S. economy and causes a huge amount of unemployment. Some big American financial institutions were crashing, too big to fail. And he's going to pass TARP, which Obama will continue, which will try to stabilize the economy. Barack Obama will be president from 2008 to 2016. He's going to pass the Affordable Health Care Act. He will continue with Bush's Great Recession policy. Obama will pass a stimulus policy to try to increase the economy. He will lose Congress after the Affordable Health Care Act. He will try to get the DREAM Act passed for children of undocumented people that are in school. During this time, we will have gay marriage legalized in Obergefell, the U.S. We're going to have also the beginning of Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement being formed. And that is everything, guys. That is all U.S. history. I hope you enjoyed this class as much as I enjoyed teaching it. And I hope you learned something about our country, both good and bad. For the last time, that is all I have for you today, kiddos. Until next time, there is no next time. Deuces, yeah.